Welcome to Big Idea Investing. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. Today, we're talking about Quantum SI and why this could be a potential stock that ARK Invest adds to their portfolio later this year. And I want to be clear, even if ARK does not purchase more Quantum SI, there is still reason for serious optimism. I do not yet hold a position, but I plan to before the end of March. Before diving into this Connecticut-based company, we do have a few reasons to believe Quantum SI will end up in ARK's portfolio. First, in the recent press release, we see, quote, accounts advised by ARK Invest listed as a participant in the $425 million oversubscribed PIPE. PIPE is just private investment in public equity where institutional money invests to raise capital for a public company. Think of this part of the deal like a normal fundraising round where companies meet investors and share their stories and pitches. An oversubscribed PIPE is the ideal outcome, meaning investors who could not get in during the PIPE fundraising round will be forced to get in on the public markets. This can be thought of like an overflow of demand. So we didn't get a specific amount for these accounts advised by ARK Invest, but I read through the SEC filing and found this. HighCape has agreed to issue and sell to the PIPE investors immediately prior to the closing an aggregate of 42.5 million shares of HighCape Class A common stock at a price of $10 per share for aggregate gross proceeds of $425 million. As a consequence of the business combination, another term for the merger, as of the closing, each of the holders of shares of HighCape Class A common stock issued pursuant to the PIPE investors subscription agreements will automatically hold on a one-for-one basis shares of new Quantum SI Class A common stock. So if these accounts advised by ARK Invest hold, they will end up with QSI stock. And from the 8K, we see that CAPA shares are Class A common stock. And just note that the par value has zero bearing on actual share value in the real world. It's just an antiquated stock thing for another day. The new QSI Class A common stock will have one vote per share, and post-merger, one CAPA share should convert to one QSI share. Next, on ARK's March market update webinar, during the Q&A portion, Simon was asked about this space directly. Here's what he had to say.
How might semiconductor development capture and expand value for protein sequencing?
Thanks for the question, Ren. So sure. Since you asked about sequencing, I'll go ahead and mention that within the broadening proteomics space. So proteomics is the study of proteins, whereas genomics is the study of the genome. These technologies go hand in hand, of course, and have many applications across healthcare. So when it comes to protein sequencing, this is really the kind of the hallmark of a company called Quantum SI, which is seeking to be able to actually, and Ali mentioned a few of the DNA bases, the A's and T's and G's and C's, but the alphabet for proteins is 20 different amino acids in human beings. So the sequencing component for a protein is being able to say, okay, well, what amino acids and what sequence do they exist in, and how does that create a protein? So semiconductors, if we peek under the hood of Quantum SI's technology, there are a series of very small nanoscale wells that exist kind of patterned inside of these semiconductor chips. And the individual reactions that are happening in each of these wells, there's a flashing of light, there's a photon emission, and you have the computer algorithms that are inputting these signals and using that to understand what is making up the protein sequences. So any development in the semiconductor space is extremely important for the development of protein sequencing technology, like the ones that underlie Quantum SI's instruments. So maybe I'll just highlight it by saying that by increasing, I mentioned those wells being embedded in the chip. The more wells that we can pack onto a chip, so think of it like the density of transistors on a semiconductor being analogous to the density of these reaction wells on a semiconductor chip. By improving that, we can increase the amount of samples that can be run on these instruments. That's called throughput. And when you throttle throughput up, you start to unlock new applications that maybe you wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So really high throughput applications, especially in the diagnostic space or in the surveillance space, you need the ability to be able to process a lot of samples. In addition to that, we think improvements could manifest on the accuracy front. So an improvement in accuracy means an improvement in speed and an improvement in your ability to not have to use complex or difficult to handle informatics algorithms on the back end. So generally speaking, I'd wrap this all up by saying that improvements in semiconductor manufacturing or the density of reaction wells on semiconductors is probably one of the main levers that proteomics companies like Quantum-Si and others can use to improve their instruments and unlock portions of the addressable market that they may not otherwise have been able to without those semiconductor improvements.
So these comments clearly show ARK Invest is tracking Quantum-Si closely, and they see the proteomics space going hand in hand with the genomics revolution. And in case you're not familiar, the semiconductor space has been growing and advancing at breakneck speeds this decade. I love that Quantum-Si is pioneering the use of semiconductors for proteomic research going forward, and this should not be overlooked, as Moore's Law and continued investments in the trillions in this space is driving our digital world forward more and more every year. And CAPA has had a nice pullback after running up to $25 per share intraday a few weeks ago and is now sitting around $13 per share. ARK Invest is also acutely familiar with the Quantum-Si founder and chairman Jonathan Rothberg. Rothberg is also the founder of Butterfly Network, ticker BFly, that ARK has been purchasing and now holds about 4 million shares of, worth about $74 million, making up a 0.8% weighting of its ARK G ETF. Rothberg played a huge role in successfully commercializing next-generation DNA sequencing with Ion Torrent and has been a disruptor leveraging the semiconductor chips to drive lower price points in healthcare, one of Quantum-Si's leading competitive advantages, which you'll hear more about shortly. Rothberg won the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Obama in 2016 for his pioneering inventions and commercialization of next-gen DNA sequencing tech, and also won the Connecticut Medal of Technology in 2010. Rothberg also founded Ion Torrent in 2007 based on a semiconductor sequencing technology that he later sold for $375 million, with a potential additional $350 million dependent on future sales. He's done a lot more as well, but you get the idea. He's a very successful inventor in the new wave of healthcare, holding over 100 patents himself. And he has said, quote, "By advancing to a digital readout in the actual sequencing of DNA in a genome, we unlock new areas of biology and created what researchers and doctors identified as the greatest advance in healthcare in the last 40 years. Next generation protein sequencing will be as important and will have an even greater economic impact." So, Quantum-Si and proteomics, which is the study of proteomes, and a proteome is just a set of proteins. Proteomics is used to identify patterns in proteins and how they react to certain stimuli. As the genomic sequencing data becomes more advanced, proteomics is growing with it and is leading the way in characterizing proteins that are present, absent, or altered at the cell level, tissue level, and with the entire organism. Quantum-Si has proprietary hardware and software, the full suite specifically designed to address existing bottlenecks in the $36 billion proteomics market, allowing real-time data streaming to the cloud that is also designed for clinical use in the future. Their leadership team has been heavily involved in the genomic sequencing space, and from years in that industry, they have direct, long-standing, close relationships with key players in the space that will help accelerate their early adopters of the proteomics technology. The global proteomics market was valued at $21 billion in 2019 and is projected to hit $50 billion by 2027, making for a 12% annual CAGR, or compound annual growth rate. Protein is responsible for physiological functions and makes up about 20% of the human body. There are over 150,000 papers on protein biomarkers, and 90% of drugs target a specific protein. Quantum-Si enables efficient protein sequencing by digitizing the proteomics space. They claim to have scalable production with their semiconductor chip, enabling millions of measurements and single molecule detection.
One of the many strengths of the technology is that it can be scaled in terms of both hardware and chips based on Moore's Law. This enables QSI to pursue a product portfolio strategy that's worked well for companies like Illumina and Thermo from a commercial perspective. In 2021, we're planning to launch our first solution, comprising Carbon, Platinum, and QSI Cloud, which would allow customers to analyze perhaps up to 50 targets with our first chip with millions of sensors or wells. As we get into 2022 and 2023, our product roadmap is designed to scale up sample throughput and data output to meet more demanding applications we see on the horizon. That may include applications like penetration of single-cell markets, blood or serum analysis for things like liquid biopsy, and additional complex clinical diagnostics. Our engineering team has put together a blueprint for how to achieve that with instruments that could run higher capacity chips or run multiple chips in parallel, in addition to other engineering concepts. On the consumable side, we have chip designs that potentially allow us to release higher capacity chips with tens of millions of sensors as we continue to build our user base. Additionally, we would expect to release improvements to our kit chemistry for continued improvements in data quality across accuracy, coverage, and speed. Into the later years of the current roadmap, 2024 and beyond, we also have the opportunity to scale down with an instrument we're calling ATO. We have some early prototypes of this instrument we're aiming to offer for less than $5,000. And this really offers line of sight to address interesting consumer applications. Those could include at-home testing or potentially point-of-care testing. Lastly, no matter the hardware embodiment, either higher throughput or lower throughput instrumentation, we can use the same chips to run samples. Thus, no major revisions are required to the core chip architecture for any of these instruments.
CAPA is the ticker right now for the SPAC, but after approval and completion of the merger, the company will trade under the ticker QSI. According to Quantum SI's slide deck, the pro forma ownership shows that PIPE investor shares, the portion that ARK is included in, will make up 29.1% ownership. Retail investors like you and me would own 7.9% of the company, and QSI retains 60.8% ownership of the company. Upon approval of the merger, it should result in $514 million in cash on QSI's balance sheet, leaving them well capitalized until their projected profitability around 2025. The merger is expected to be completed sometime in Q2 of this year. And taking a look at their timeline, this year Quantum SI is in early access for key influencers in the space, and they're looking to commercialize their products in 2022. Meaning, yes, they are a pre-revenue company. Quantum SI is projecting $186 million in revenue by 2025. As of the recording of this episode, CAPA is trading at a $201 million market cap, which brings us here where we see the consumable products offer flexible options and between 50 to 100 runs or uses per year per device. The $45,000 average yearly consumable spend per MySeq placement is Illumina's tool that performs genomic DNA sequencing and data analysis. So quick math, with 5,000 hardware product placements times $45,000 per year per hardware placement, that would be an estimated $225 million in annual revenue by 2025.
Now that you have visibility on how we plan to drive revenue, I would like to give you further perspective on the projected models for instrument placements and breakdown of revenue. As stated, we project over 5,000 instrument placements by the end of 2025. With shipments beginning in the second half of 2021 to our early access customers. This is a customer segment that the team knows very, very well, and we've worked with for decades with many tremendous relationships. Full commercial release will be launched in 2022. We predict accelerated commercial adoption and condensed sales cycles relative to the general market based on an expected $50,000 average cost of entry. $50,000 is a level that most, if not all, labs can obtain without going through a grant cycle or rigorous administrative approval. Typical capital equipment purchases over $250,000, which represents a large portion of the proteomic market, have a sales cycle that can take up to 6 months to a full year. We believe we can have a consolidated sales cycle down to just 1 to 3 months on average. This is a true razor blade model, with each system installation generating a potential consumable run rate annually of up to 2.5 times the cost of entry of the initial capital purchase. This provides two very attractive aspects to the business. The first, a potential high margin growth of consumable pull-through for years after the initial purchase. Right out of the gate, margins could exceed 65% for both instruments and consumables. And over time, we expect consumables would continue to increase with scale. Second, the future run rate would build predictability in revenue cycles and future profitability. Under the current model, we potentially could achieve positive cash flow heading into 2026.
Please note, these company projections are just estimates and the actual execution of these figures is not by any means a guarantee. But how do you guys feel about Quantum SI and High Cape Capital? I would love to hear your thoughts below. But that's all that I have for you guys today. Please take a second to like this video if you did. Consider subscribing for more investing content, and I hope to see you in the next video. I hope that you have a great day.